Well, I want to start with you, Ruthie, to talk about this strike in particular. What makes this strike different from previous strikes against the regime?
Well, for one thing, we have about 140 Israel Air Force planes in the air. That's huge. And Iran is far away. It's not like Gaza or Lebanon that are on our borders. So first of all, Iran is very far away. It's a very complex operation. Other things that have gone on, over the years, Israel has conducted operations in Iran and against Iran, but they were much more covert. Most of them Israel didn't take responsibility for. I mean, the most daring one was in 2018 when the Mossad actually retrieved thousands of documents from inside Tehran. But this is different. This is an Israeli Air Force strike on targets in Iran. And so far, what we've been told is that they're only on military targets, not on the oil fields, not on the nuclear sites, and not on leaders of the regime so far.
How big of a surprise is that, considering it seemed like the first two general targets were going to be on the oil fields and on some of the military sites?
Well, not after all the pressure from the Biden administration. For weeks now, they said, don't do that. Don't hit the oil fields and don't hit the nuclear sites. And let's face it, the reason they didn't want us to do that, for many reasons, okay, but before the election, the last thing they wanted was a rise in prices at the gas stations in America. So that was the fear of the oil fields. But the nuclear sites, listen, the United States has been appeasing Iran for years now. Okay, so that's not a surprise. And the United States has been tying Israel's hands throughout the war for the past year in various ways, while also saying, we have your back, we'll help you with defenses. But anything that's related to offensive measures, then it's, don't do it. Okay, so whether that means that this strike is going to be very limited because Netanyahu would like to adhere to requests from Washington or not, we don't know yet. We don't know yet. I hope not. I hope that Israel takes only its own interests into account.
And I know one of the biggest things that happened on October 7th, of course, with the tragedy, what happened to the civilians and of course, civilian deaths since then in both Israel and in the Gaza Strip has been this lack of deterrence. Can you talk about deterrence and maybe what this strike and series of strikes does for the region?
Well, if Israel keeps going and targets necessary sites, now that could be, I can't even tell you what it could be. I know that recently we just in Lebanon we attacked Hezbollah's financial institutions, and that weakens that very much. I imagine that the strikes that in Tehran right now are doing a similar thing, weakening the regime through its various oaths, through the military, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and that will create deterrence, but it won't work unless Israel goes through with it to the end, to the best of its ability, because if it's just little tit for tat strikes, what we'll have is the lack of deterrence that we had prior to October 7th last year, which was, okay, we go into Gaza a little bit, they fire rockets, we ignore some of them, we return fire, then we sign some kind of phony ceasefire agreement. And why I say phony is like what happened with Lebanon and UN Security Council Resolution 1701. It was signed, and all that did was enable Hezbollah to regroup, rearm, and build tunnels. So again, deterrence only works if you actually take care of the threat and not just kick the can down the road.
And for Americans, I know the biggest thing that a lot of people watch for in elections, and especially as it relates to this election, is the involvement of American military in abroad countries, in foreign countries, and in foreign conflicts. Certainly, considering the past 20 years in the United States, does an attack like this make a greater chance that America's military gets involved, or lessens that chance? And specifically, I think they think about combat troops and boots on the ground.
Well, absolutely. But see, this is the interesting thing. For the past year, the one thing Israel has said, and it said it to all its allies, we don't need your boots on the ground. We will take care of it. We're on the front lines. We are the boots on the ground. Just please don't prevent us from achieving victory. Please don't withhold weapons. Please don't embargo arms, as we see that France is doing now. And please don't tie our hands. We're on the front lines for Western civilization. So the least you can do is let us do the job. But never did Israel expect U.S. boots on the ground.
Right. And then what effects do you think this has on America's election going forward, if anything? Because I know it could possibly send a message that Israel's a strong ally right now in a situation 2 weeks before an election.
Well, it seems logical to me that one of the reasons that the Biden administration didn't want Israel to execute some, stunning operation is that I think that Vice President Harris and her team, I think they believe that that will help Trump get elected. Now, I don't know that that's true. I think that's the perception. And the perception is that Trump is much more, first of all, he ripped up the Iran deal when he became president. He made many moves in Israel that actually helped deterrence, and he made peace deals, the Abraham Accords. Now, the Biden administration tried to appease Iran. The Biden administration started refunding the UN groups that have associations with Hamas. So it makes sense that they fear that Americans who see a strong Israel will say, oh, that's what we want. That's what we like. Americans do like strength, especially when it's defeating evil enemies and regimes. And especially when they don't have to have their own boots on the ground there, of course. So I think that that's the fear in Washington, is that any major operation that Israel conducts that's successful will help Trump get elected.
And last couple questions for you too. I know we were talking about this before we started, but what's the significance of this happening on the Sabbath, on Shabbat, for many of Israelis to be able to execute this strike?
Well, it's more interesting that it's happening on Shabbat because so many things happen on Shabbat here on Friday, Saturday. So many events that, it's amazing. You realize that secular neighbors of religious people yell out their windows, when they see them coming back from synagogue on Saturday, saying, hey, guess what? This happened and that happened. It happens often, but what is especially interesting about this Shabbat is that it also is just ending the Simchat Torah holiday. And that was the Shabbat that Hamas launched its October 7th massacre. That was the day. And I think it's extremely symbolic. Whether it was geared toward this day or not specifically, I can't say. But it is extremely symbolic and relevant, and it sends a message.
Yeah, many of us in the West, and of course also, I imagine Israel as well, we're thinking about October 7th. But as you mentioned, Simchat Torah is really that day that a lot of people are remembering this event, particularly happening on in Israel. Then just last couple questions for you too here. What is the atmosphere like there? We were talking a little bit before too. A lot of people are asleep. You're staying up with us. What have you been able to perceive so far? And of course, as we mentioned before, there's religious observance of what's going on too.
Well, what I'm perceiving from television, I'm flipping, I'm going back and forth from the different Israeli television stations. And what's interesting that the talking heads, there are the typical talking heads who are saying, yeah, this is just going to be very limited and it's just our way of sending a little message, but obeying Biden and not really doing anything. Now, I personally, I'm listening to this, okay, a lot. This is typical. Throughout the war, we're hearing that. Yeah, we're not really going to do anything. And what does victory mean? And how are we going to achieve it this way and that way? Okay, some on the right and some on the left for different reasons. I believe that we have to be patient. We've seen that every time we get discouraged, Israel conducts an amazing operation, successful, amazing operation. And I believe that that's what's happening now. I think what we've seen is that there already have been two, what they call waves of attacks in Tehran. And I don't believe it's the end of it, because if it were, I think the government knows that that won't be sufficient to just say, okay, we had some fireworks in Tehran and that'll satisfy our, like a sound and light show, and then we'll go back to sleep. No, I don't think that's happening this time.
And finally, what effect does this have on the two current battlefields right now, still in the Gaza Strip, and then of course also to the north in Lebanon?
Well, I imagine that it is terrifying the terrorist organizations, who are all of whom, are under Iran's thumb. So it's not just in Hamas in Gaza, and also Islamic Jihad, and not only Hezbollah in Lebanon. There's the Houthis in Yemen. They're the Iraqi militias. I think all of them are afraid. And I want to tell you something. It was interesting. I think Iran was really panicked, has been panicked for the last couple of weeks, because after saying, if you dare do anything, you're going to be sorry. We're going to take out, kill all your citizens. And then suddenly the message was, well, if you limit your attack to military sites, we'll consider that, okay, you repaid us and we won't do too much. And that indicates panic on the part of the regime.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Ruthie, for joining us this evening, I guess this morning from where you are.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.